not with a view to regulate your practice, but your judgment. As to old women and the mob of newspaper readers, they are pleased with anything providing it is bloody enough. But the mind of sensibility requires something more. First, then, let us speak of the kind of person who is adapted to the purpose of the murderer. Secondly, of the place where. Thirdly, of the time when, and other little circumstances. As to the person, I suppose it is evident that he ought to be a good man, because, if he were not, he might himself by possibility be contemplating murder at the very time, and such diamond-cut diamond tussles, though pleasant enough where nothing better is stirring, are really not what a critic can allow himself to call murders. I could mention some people, I have no names, who have been murdered by other people in a dark lane, and so far as all seemed correct enough, but, on looking farther into the matter, the public had become aware that the murdered party was himself, at the moment, planning to rob his murderer at the least, and possibly to murder him if he had been strong enough. Whatever that is the case, or may be thought to be the case, farewell to all the genuine effects of the art. For the final purpose of murder, considered as a fine art, is precisely the same as that of tragedy. In Aristotle's account of it, to cleanse the heart by means of pity and terror. Now, terror there may be, but how can there be any pity for one tiger destroyed by another tiger? It is also evident that the person selected ought not to be a public character. For instance, no judicious artist would have attempted to murder Abraham Newland. For the case was this. Everybody read so much about Abraham Newland, and so few people ever saw him, that there was a fixed belief that he was an abstract idea. And I remember that once, when I happened to mention that I had dined at a coffee house in company with Abraham Newland, everybody looked scornfully at me, as though I had pretended to have been playing billiards with Prester John, or have had an affair of honor with the Pope. And, by the way, the Pope would be a very improper person to murder, for he has such a virtual ubiquity as the father of Christendom, and, like the cuckoo, is so often heard but not seen, that I suspect that most people regard him also as an abstract idea. Where, indeed, a public character is in the habit of giving dinners, with every delicacy of the season, the case is very different. Every person is satisfied that he is no abstract idea, and therefore there can be no impropriety in murdering him, only that his murder will fall into a class of assassinations, which I have not yet treated. Thirdly, the subject chosen ought to be in good health, for it is absolutely barbarous to murder a sick person, who is usually quite unable to bear it. On this principle, no Cockney ought to be chosen who is above 25, for after that age he is sure to be dyspeptic. Or at least, if a man will hunt with Nat Warren, he ought to murder a couple at one time. If the Cockneys chosen should be tailors, he will of course think it his duty, on the old established equation, to murder 18. And here, in this attention to the comfort of sick people, you will observe the usual effect of a fine art to soften and refine the feelings. The world in general, gentlemen, are very bloody-minded, and all they want in a murder is a copious effusion of blood. Gaudy display in this point is enough for them. But the enlightened connoisseur is more refined in his taste, and from our art, as from all the other liberal arts when thoroughly cultivated, the result is to improve and to humanize the heart. So true it is that "Injustis didisi fideliter arts immoliat mores nix sinit es feros." A philosophic friend, well known for his philanthropy and general benignity, suggests that the subject chosen ought also to have a family of young children, wholly dependent on his exertions, by way of deepening the pathos. And undoubtedly this is a judicious caution. Yet I would not insist too keenly on this condition. Severe good taste unquestionably demands it, but still, where the man was otherwise unobjectionable in points of morals and health, I would not look with too curious a jealousy to a restriction which might have the effect of narrowing the artist's sphere. So much for the person. As to the time, the place, and the tools, I have many things to say which at present I have no room for. The good sense of the practitioner has usually directed him to night and privacy. Yet there have not been wanting cases where this rule was departed from with excellent effect. In respect to time, Mrs. Ruscombe's case is a beautiful exception, which I have already noticed. And in respect both to time and place, there is a fine exception in the Annals of Edinburgh, year 1805, familiar to every child in Edinburgh, but which has unaccountably been defrauded of its due portion of fame among English amateurs. The case I mean is that of a porter of one of the banks, who was murdered whilst carrying a bag of money, in broad daylight, on turning out of High Street, one of the most public streets in Europe, and the murderer is to this hour undiscovered. Sed fugit interia, fugit in temporalis tempus, singula dum capti circumvectator amor. And now, gentlemen, in conclusion, let me again solemnly disclaim all pretensions on my own part to the character of a professional man. I never attempted any murder in my life, except in the year 1801, upon the body of a tomcat, and that turned out differently from my intention. My purpose, I own, was downright murder. Semper ergo auditor tantum, said I, nunquam me reponem. And I went downstairs in search of Tom at 1 o'clock on a dark night, with the animus, and no doubt with the fiendish looks of a murderer. But when I found him, he was in the act of plundering the pantry of bread and other things. Now this gave a new turn to the affair. For the time being one of general scarcity, when even Christians were reduced to the use of potato bread, rice bread, and all sorts of things, it was downright treason in a tomcat to be wasting good wheaten bread in the way he was doing. It instantly became a patriotic duty to put him to death, and as I raised aloft and shook the glittering steel, I fancied myself rising like Brutus, effulgent from a crowd of patrons, and as I stabbed him, I, quote, called aloud on Tully's name, and bade the father of his country hail. Since then, what wandering thoughts I may have had of attempting the life of an ancient ewe, of a superannuated hen, and such small deer, are locked up in the secrets of my own breast. But for the higher departments of the art, I confess myself to be utterly unfit. My ambition does not rise so high. No, gentlemen, in the words of Horace, fungos vitae cotis excodum, ridere erquart ferum velle, exors ipsa secandi. End of On Murder Considered as One of the Fine Arts. From Miscellaneous Essays by Thomas De Quincey.